All right, welcome back, friends, and thank you very much. You okay, Jen? Am I very loud? All right, we're gonna wait just a minute. Okay. A little too loud for you there, Jen? You're muted. Hi. 1 second.
There it is. Sorry, I'm at work today and my office door, someone just walked in. I'm like, can't come in.
Oh my goodness. I thought it was right when I said something, so I thought that I was just being too loud to the microphone. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're so glad to have you all back. And at this point, I would like to introduce Jennifer Stencel, who has also been with us for the good portion of our Northeast Ohio UX World IA Day adventures. If you have been in person to Kent, you would have seen that Jen did our pop-up libraries, which were so much fun. Jennifer has over 25 years of progressive management responsibility in public libraries, currently serving as the branch manager and teen librarian at the Richfield Library of Akron-Summit County Public Library. And Jen, this is old, so I hope that I am giving you the correct intro. She and her co-librarian write monthly business book reviews for the Richfield Chamber. She's an implementer of innovative ideas pulled from the business and entrepreneurial and museum world to address the changes in the use of libraries. Jennifer is a human-centered design thinking practitioner. She is a recent postmaster's graduate of the San Jose State University iSchool on Emerging Technologies and Digital Libraries, where her two favorite courses were in IA and gaming information. She embraces the emotional user experience concepts, the work done on encoding spaces, and placemaking ideology on public space and use. She is attentive to millennial and Gen Z trends and enjoys community relationship building. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen.
Thank you. Well, I certainly love today's theme, connecting. I struggled with it earlier in when I first heard about it, and then it just all clicked to me. And I think it's a very important theme to have at this moment in time. So really quickly, while Mark and Todd were giving their presentation, it made me think of the book. It's called "Is This Anything?" by Jerry Seinfeld. And I guess the practice is you would walk around and you would say, hey, is this anything here? Do I have anything with this? And Jerry Seinfeld says over the years, he has a accordion binder with 45 years of content. I would hate to be an IA and try to organize that binder, but I thought that was interesting. So always keep your stuff, put it in a binder, and you'll never know when you'll pull it out and say, hey, is this anything? So I'm breaking up this presentation today into 3 parts. We're going to go over the pandemic effects, not that anyone needs a refresher on that. We'll go through some books that will help you connect. And then we'll talk about the creative stuff of IA and UX. So as I was telling Carrie Ann at the beginning, this is like a mullet. We're going to be all business in the front and the IA stuff is the party in the back. So first off, there's this book out. It's called The Lonely Century. And this guy on the right, Brian Solis, said, lonely century, let's try the last 10 months. Let's just talk about when he said this, it was 2021, so 10 months into the pandemic, and all the effects that the last 10 months have just absolutely sideswiped us. And we have created patterns that are now long-lasting effects from this pandemic. And so I think that's something that we have to keep in mind when I'm dealing with patrons out on the floor or when you're designing your websites or interactions with folks. So to keep in mind that, yes, there's this documentation of a lonely century. There's another book that you might remember that came out, I want to say in 2000, called Bowling Alone, where we're already starting to see the effects of people living by themselves or not connecting. The last couple of years, there has been books that have come out called Happy Singlehood the rising acceptance of being single to single on purpose, which just came out in 2021. So that's some interesting factors. So here we are in a shutdown, or we were in a shutdown, and then we have a lot of folks that are choosing to either live alone or through some detrimental consequences are now living alone, and just the mental places that those folks are in. I see a lot of it working here at the library. The patrons that I had in before 2020, March of 2020, are not in the same place that they were coming through my doors this year. So I think about when I'm designing something, or perhaps when you're designing something, you probably already see this, just the absolute changes that are occurring or have occurred with the people that we're serving. So to keep that in mind. So anyway, Microsoft work trends. So this is also affecting us, right? We're part of this global pandemic and all the side effects. So I was studying Microsoft work trends. I have a link for that at the end. In 2021, the top trends were, besides working remote, were that number 2, leaders are out of touch with their employees, obviously, because everyone's working remote. So what does that do to connectiveness? Number 4 trend was that Gen Z is at a risk of disconnect, right? So Gen Z is your 18 to 25-year-olds. What are they doing? They're entering the workforce at a time where there is no water cooler or onboarding because everything is virtual. And how do you network when you're working virtually? Number 5 on this trend was shrinking networks are endangering innovation, right? So we talk about the water cooler. There's no one there to talk to, bounce your ideas off of. And that's playing a huge disconnect, causing a huge disconnect. New for 22, Microsoft just released their work trends for 2022. The number 1 is ties that bond. So it's all about reawakening ties and investing in your social capital. So we have come to realize that we've come to a great disconnect, and we're trying to do something about that. Number 4 is feeling of being muted. How funny, I couldn't unclick my mute earlier, but it's the sensation that we recognize that people have not been seen or heard. We need to correct that. Number 8 is so nice to meet you, and it talks about correcting that onboarding of people. And actually what has happened is onboarding has gotten better virtually because managers have had to communicate more with new employees. And so they're checking in more. So that is actually crucial. So those are some of the work trends that we're seeing in 2022. Now, Brian Solis, he's a futurist that I follow, and he wrote an article that basically talked about Generation N. What's unique about Generation N is that it's called Generation Novel, and it means it's not tied to any birth year. It's not 0 to age 25. It's all of us. We have all been affected by this pandemic. The number 1 thing he said is that, again, in the last 10 months, we have gone through a decade worth of change, which means who would have thought we would all be working virtual for as long as we have, and it might be here to stay, or at least in some hybrid form. He also talked about we've had the ability to summon. So he talks about how the online exchange of goods has skyrocketed. Listen, we have been able to summon toilet paper to our door, right? Over the pandemic, we couldn't go to the store, so we had to summon Amazon to our front steps to get toilet paper. So he's just saying a huge behavior shift. But one thing that is interesting is Main Street America. I follow them, and all the work that they're doing to try to connect people, to come out, to come together, and how that has affected how people behave in a big setting. So at the end of this presentation, I put in a link about a presentation they just did called Connecting People When You Live in a Cold Winter City. How do you get people outside, and how do you reconnect with your neighbor? So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting, and there might be something in there for you. At the end of this presentation, I have a Jamboard. So while I'm speaking, if you think of anything, please add it to that Jamboard. Books, people you follow, reports, so we could have a great collection. This one is, so where we are, we're at the power of little ideas. I think people want to start small. We have to be true to our values, true to our core, true to who we are. To say we're at a point of, hey, let's be disruptive. I don't think anyone wants to be disruptive. I think our mental capacity is not at a place to be disruptive. Disruption is too risky. So to start and do things the small way, this was a fabulous book. It really helped my reset to say, okay, I'm on the right track. Let's just do small. Let's stay true to who we are. And where we are not, and I hope we are never, is that it's called Amp It Up. And I rarely put in a book where I say, please do not read this, but here it is. Please don't read this. Please don't buy anything that has to do with amping anything up. We are not there. This is not where folks are. Here's a quote from that book. It's all about, so it's for the owner to do all this, lead for hypergrowth, raise expectation, increase urgency, and elevate intensity. No one is there. Please don't do that. And it's all about without making expensive changes to your talent. Again, so watch out for these books. If you want to help the Great Resignation, this is the book to read. So anyway, so that's not where we are right now. So this slide is all about, I think they're great for personas. So from moving from On the Roof, this is a photo documentary of during the shutdown, folks taking pictures of how people lived during the shutdown. There's beautiful pictures in here about people on their fire escapes or on their rooftops or waving to each other from, one window to the next. It's just a beautiful book. To move into the Front Steps project, this was, again, they took photos from across the country. Some are from Australia and Canada, so there's a little bit of globalness to it. And it's just people came out on their front porch and how people lived during the pandemic. Again, I think that's a fabulous book if you want to take some of these pictures, put them up on a wall, and they will guide you through your personas just to say, hey, this is where people were and probably still are. And if you want to go global, the year that changed our world, this is fabulous. This one has, there's a picture in there that I'll never forget about a church that was converted into basically a hospital or a COVID shot, giving out the shot. Imagine that, this beautiful church and there's all these cots. That's where we were, right? So I think it's just to help us, okay, where were we? And we're still coming out of this. So those are all great pictures. The bottom half, together in a sudden strangeness, these are just poems, again, maybe helpful for personas. And when we came outside, these are a variety of authors that wrote about what they experienced. Those are two great books. Again, to put you in the mindset of your users. And let's not forget the kids and the people stayed home. This is a picture book that came out so parents and caregivers could explain to kids what was going on and why we had to stay home and how we were all staying safe, but how we could still connect with one another and not feel that isolation. But the pandemic wasn't the only thing going on. This one over here, the purpose, sorry, talks about all the social unrest and the social activities. And Elisa Garza talks about how during this time she was able to activate people to come together. So if you're rallying around a cause, it's a fantastic book to read for activism. So let's not forget about that. So this death, grief, and loss, a lot of that happened. A lot of people are coming in from a place of loss. recently, a good friend of mine lost her husband, and due to COVID, and so we are still here. We are still going through the loss. It is not over yet. This Death, Grief, and Loss, unfortunately, it's a $160 book, but it's incredibly scholarly. And it talks about, if you can find it, it's at the Worcester College. So if anyone has a library card there, you can rent it, look at it. But again, it's very scholarly journals and research, and it talks about how COVID has reshaped how we think about trauma and loss, and how we reconsider death and grief after this huge time frame that we have been through, and this huge loss. And institutional care, what's going on with institutional care, and just the impact of COVID. On a brighter scale, digital transformation in a post-COVID world just talks about how everything has been changed, from urban planning, public health, technology, and it talks about how this affected the people and the places. Again, another very scholarly book, not as expensive. It's about $65, but very hard to find. I couldn't find it anywhere, but the reviews that I read and reading through the chapters, I thought this was spot on. The Pandemic Population. This is a book if you do a lot of work with teenagers. This one angered my daughter. I have a 16-year-old, and she said, "We are not like this." So take, I guess, everything that you read with a grain of salt, but it talks about how this has affected teens. And there, at the end of this presentation, I put in the UK, there was a video journaling done by teens in the UK, where for about 12 weeks they put out a prompt, and the teens responded and uploaded their videos. So one of the fun ones to watch is, this is me pretending to do school during COVID, and it's, of course, everything that they're not doing during the school day, but how they did school, and they narrated it themselves. So the teens took control of documenting living through this pandemic. And I thought it was just, again, if you ever need to do a persona, just to watch how these kids were nimble and flexible, but I still worry about the longevity of this and what we're going to see in a couple years. And to that point, White Pulse, so it's the letter Y, Pulse, did a webinar called, it had to do with the life stages or their milestones for the 18 to 25, and how that has affected so much. So they didn't go to college, right? So what does that mean? They're now a couple years behind. They went straight into the workforce, or they're not getting married, or, some of these other things that are going on in their life. Huge milestones, right? This is such an age where you're launching yourself, and it's just saying, okay, they didn't. So what does that mean? Where does that put them on your scale of, when do they get a house? When do they get married? When do they do these other things? So again, to think about where your users are right now and how this pandemic has just shifted everything just a few years off. The Stranger as My Guest. This is for my anthropologists and ethnographers out there. This has to do with the great immigration flow that we have been experiencing. North Hill here in Akron, and I know Cleveland Heights have experienced great influx in refugees. In fact, Cleveland Heights Library hired a refugee librarian or an immigrant librarian to help them when they come into the library. So this has to do with, let's get back to hospitality. Let's start treating people, taking the cues from a hospitality standpoint, because we're just such in a fragile state. And that's how we approach our users or one another, or even people in our office. So I thought that one to be a little interesting for you all. Another one is called Atlas of the Heart. This was absolutely phenomenal. I think, again, one that helps you put things in perspective. What Brene Brown did is that she mapped all the emotions that the humans experience. And what she did is the chapters are divided into, for example, chapter 1, when things don't go as planned. And she goes through all the emotions that one experiences when things don't go as planned, anything from boredom to frustration. Another chapter is when things are uncertain. It talks about feeling dread, but also being vulnerable. And where does that put a person? She has some positive things like when we search for connection. When we're searching for connection, we're feeling we want a sense of belonging. But what happens when that goes wrong? Then we feel invisible. So I think it's a great when you're again, working with folks to understand, okay, there's a wide range of emotions where people are right now. When life is good, they're feeling happiness, but right now there's a little bit of foreboding, right? Because it's like, how long is this going to last? Will we tailspin again? So a lot of places where people are in terms of their emotion, a very fast read. So this is, okay, let's connect with one another. I don't know if you have read The Art of Gathering. That is absolutely was popular here. What I love about this book is it talks about before you even meet somebody, how do you set up that expectation to meet, and how do you get someone excited to actually come to a meeting or a gathering or an interview, and how you set the table, and then how you are a good hostess during that time, and then how do you close that meeting so there's not a sense of loss or disconnect. She did a wonderful job. One of the things I took away from it is when I'm having a meeting, she actually sends out worksheets or a workbook. She calls it a workbook, and she wants to set the stage before you come to a meeting. So she asks these really deep questions to get you thinking, but in a way that you want to respond or react to. It doesn't feel like homework. So that's a lot of what I took away from her book. And then she also has a podcast. Unfortunately, it's not going on right now. There's only a few in that series, and it's called Together Apart. So the next one is called The Power of Strangers. This one has a little bit of humor into it because Joe does everything he can to talk to strangers. And sometimes that is funny. So let's not be nervous to talk to strangers. But what I got out of this book is when did strangers get such a negative connotation, right? Stranger danger. Why is there such a bad rap? A couple of books that are written, don't come across a stranger. But it's a funny read, and it's like we need to turn this on that. We need to turn that around and say, strangers have a lot to offer us. And let's just go out there and meet and talk to people once again. We do that all the time here at the library, and it's amazing the stories that I get out of folks. Anyway, When Strangers Meet, she did a TED Talk, so these two are very similar. I like The Power of Strangers better. When Strangers Meet it's a smaller book, so if you don't have much time, covers the same thing. And again, she also did a TED Talk. And at the end of the book, she has some prompts for you if you're not comfortable going out there talking to strangers, of how you can go out there and talk to strangers. So some prompts there for you. Social chemistry is a bit deeper. It has a bit of more of a scientific background to it, but it talks about the networks and how people network together. And there's even a test for you to take to find out what kind of networker are you. Are you a broker, a networker? Are you a connector? Or are you, I think the word she used was exploiter. Expansionist. Ooh, not exploiter. Ooh, sorry about that. An expansionist. So do you like to expand or connect or leverage your connection? So I thought that was very interesting to find out who you are when you're networking, and just where people are coming from when they're trying to network with others. Where are they coming from? What kind of persona in a network are they? This Get Together, there's also a podcast for Get Together. I love this one. It's a little bit of case studies. So who's really good at being a creating community. How do you create community, especially in a virtual world? The number one thing or piece that you need to have is called a good origin story. So people feel rallied around that origin or what you have to offer. And then it talks about then how do you create the stickiness to keep people with you, and then in turn become, I guess, leaders themselves of your cause and how they take ownership of it. So again, another fast read. The first case study has to do with a running club and how he rallied folks in New York City to do night running. I thought that, it just talked about the community that he created already in chapter 1 of that book. So I see there's a lot of, I was reading The Gifts of Imperfection. Yes. That is, I love Brene Brown. So many of her books are just spot on. Coming for April of 2022, so I have obviously not read this one, is Designing for Belonging, and it's out of the D School, Stanford Design School. This is more for your workplace and creating a more inclusive workplace. Again, when I spoke about the work trends, it's all about feeling heard and not muted and being seen. And again, this is coming from the design world of how to create that very inclusive environment. So I am just looking forward to the Design for Belonging to take care of my workplace. Because as we all know, I don't know if you read the Gallup polls, we have been in 10 years, in a decade, this is our worst engagement with employees. So engagement is at an all-time low. So of course, we're working on that, right? And this last one, this is an absolutely fun one. It's more of a travel book, but it's called Alone Time. And I just want to put out there that alone time is good. Having some decompression time is good. You do need to recover and recharge yourself. What I got out of this is how do you create experiences where people want to savor what is happening around them, how they want to feel connected, maybe gaming the experience or listening or pausing or seeing. When I read this, I just felt energized. I'm like, yes, this is how I want to be when I'm in this, when I'm in a place. I want to feel like I'm learning, like I'm pausing, like I'm refreshing, and that there's a little bit of game to it. So it's a very fun read. And I don't know where I heard this, but this was right in the beginning of the pandemic. And a lot of folks are feeling this right now. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to before what was considered normal. I want to move forward because I think where we're going is a very good place to be, where things belong. So this theme of being connected is just absolutely spot on. So, okay, here's the party in the back. Emotional Intelligence came out in 2018. So this is, again, it's more for health and wellness and emotional well-being, but how to design for emotional well-being is the name of the game for that one. And the heart of UX has to do with being the connected researcher, or so when you're interviewing folks, how you come from a place of not being the expert, but being open and humble, and you don't have to be the know-it-all, and you're not supposed to be, right. Beginner's state of mind is where you're supposed to be, and that just helps you be a better listener. And you let actually who you're interviewing kind of guide the conversation and take it from there. And it comes from a place of curiosity as well. This black book is from our keynote. So this is, if you're curious about where she was getting her information, this is her book. So if you want to learn more about her stages that she had, I certainly do. I did not get this in on time to talk about it today, but anyway, that's from the keynote. Creative X for curious people. If you're feeling in a rut, this is again from the Stanford Design School. These two down here on the bottom are just for you to get out of your rut. Little prompts, games to play. I I have it on, I bought it for my staff here, and it's on our design thinking space area for them to go through. And I'm going to scoot along because we're almost near the end. Designing meaning or meaningful stuff. It has to do with designing for longevity and designing for care. So these two on the top here have to do with sustainability. And the one on things we could design for a more human-centered world, he said, perhaps we have taken the human-centered too far, and that's why we're damaging our planet. So how can we be, yes, put the human at the center, but also the planet at the center, and so we're not damaging, we're creating for all in a more sustainable way. And lastly, since I'm close to time, again, just a fun book. You look like something to love. What I love about this one has to do with artificial intelligence. And the first chapter talks about how she's training the machine to do knock-knock jokes. And the machine's not getting it, putting, jumbly stuff together. And then one day, the machine says, knock, knock. It is doing it itself. Knock, knock. Who's there? Alec. Alec who? I like Alec knock knock jokes. So the machine recognized humor. So that's all I have for you today. And again, there's the Jamboard. If you want to add anything of who you read, who you follow, other books, website, so on and so forth, I encourage you to add to this Jamboard. And so we'll have a great collection. This is me. I work at the Akron Summit Library. You will find all these books on the Goodreads World IA Day, my email, and I would be remiss quickly not to talk about Mark's book, Make Your Customers Dance. I don't know if you've ever been to a wedding where the bride didn't want anyone to dance, but we all bounced and we hung out elsewhere in the bar. So I've experienced a wedding where everyone bounced, and it's so important to get your customers to dance. That's it. Any questions?
I was gonna say, Jen, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Jen?
I will stop sharing. Boop.
All right. Well, we are not going to take a break right now. We are going to run right into Lauren or Jen. I don't know if you see, but Lauren says this was wonderful. Thank you. So to let you know, we are going to run right into our next presentation, which is World